All right, welcome back again to our Black Sheep series. We're going to do another incredible, hard-hitting message from Old Paths Baptist Church and Pastor Jason Cooley. And he has an incredible message here. It was so hard-hitting that I had to just take time to just represent it here and add it in here to the podcast series. And you're going to hear some of this historical discussion about the papacy that no other churches or pastors in this country seem to have the courage to discuss beyond the individuals that you hear on this particular podcast and who have the patience and the charity and kindness to spend time with us on this podcast here at Looking Glass Forum. So here, let's listen to Jason Cooley break down the incredible and awful, horrifying historical reality that the Roman papacy is the font of all abominations and horrors that have faced history on earth. And the planet has suffered for centuries under the brutal tyranny and despotism of the Roman papacy. And so this is a reality that so many Christians, so many Bible believers in America are totally ignorant to, and we have to just bring this information out. And Pastor Jason Cooley is one of the magnificent preachers that God has empowered and trained up. And you can see that his teaching is bold and courageous, and in so many ways, this is the message of our time that so many Christian churches and pastors have refused to discuss and bring out. So we're going to highlight it now. Let's take a listen.
The Pope is being this great guy and Rome being this great. And if somebody speaks against Rome, oh no, and you got all these. It's like, what a joke. By the way, these Roman Catholic women are about as much airheads as you could possibly have. Candace Owens included. Man, what an airhead. What an absolute airhead. And also that Carrie, whatever her name is, I never can say her name. What an airhead. Absolute airheads. But anyway. And then you've got these Knights of Malta out there in the media. You've got these Roman Catholics in the Supreme Court. Right? And anyway, so we have all these people that are really pushing Rome. Right? They're really pushing Roman Catholicism. And I think it's important to just remind people, to give them a good history lesson, and to remind them about Rome. So now what we're going to do is look at the history of Rome, look at the history of their involvement in the Holocaust. And then now you have Roman Catholics trying to deny that the Holocaust even took place when Hitler is a Roman Catholic. Hitler was trained Roman Catholic. Whether it's fascism or whether it's communism, they're both ran by Rome. Both of them. All one needs to do to look at where communism was perfected is the reductions of Paraguay. If you understand the reductions of Paraguay, the Jesuits ran the reductions of Paraguay, enslaved those people into communist rule, and had them work in slave labor. That's what they did. Those are inconvenient history lessons that nobody wants. Okay? So, we'll read some things here. By the way, the Roman Empire was taken over by the papal Caesar. See, the Roman Empire, when it lost its emperor, transferred the power into the papal Caesar. If you go back to Constantine, who made a edict of freedom, so to speak, but not for the Donatists and not for those that disagreed with him. Constantine was not a Christian. He was a political Christian like Trump is, but not a biblical Christian. Most of them are political. I'm going to read you some things here. Some history. A lot of this comes from, well, some of this will come from Vatican assassins. Some of this will come from quotes from other men. Dave Hunt. Some will come from research that was done by Dr. Lamore. But you have to understand that the Holocaust was not... Germany was prepared long before Adolf Hitler came on the scene. Let me read you this quote by Peter Ruckman. The official Vatican publications, Observatore Romano and Civiltà Cattolica, were both busy conducting international campaigns against the Jews. To help Allah and Islam along, the Observatore Romano published Adolf Hitler's favorite book, The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, and had thousands of copies distributed among British troops, occupying the British Mandate in Palestine. No sooner had the protocols gotten into the hands of the British Army of Occupation than Winston Winnie the Pooh Churchill took off to Cairo, Egypt, to meet with Muslims and Roman Catholics. No Jews were allowed at the conference, so on March 27, 1921, he handed over, without a consent of the League of Nations, 2/3 of Israel's land area to a Muslim Caliph Abdullah. He then bragged about having created Transjordan with a stroke of a pen. T.E. Lawrence of Arabia was the one who egged Winston on to give away 2/3 of the Promised Land to Allah in violation of the Balfour Declaration, and thus deliberately creating the Pope's Israel-Arab agitation for over 80 years. So the Pope can put out hits on people? He sure can. He does it all the time. Absolutely, he can put out hits on people. You better believe he can. He's a mobster. Who do you think runs the Italian mafia? That should be pretty easy to remember. Let's go back a little bit. Let's see. As the Romans had done in Jerusalem in AD 135, any city designated a holy city of Islam, such as the Paranonan in Tunisia in the 13th century, was made Jew-free. What Islam modeled was repeated in Nazi Germany in the last century, as one village or city after another was declared Juden-free. In the German elections of May 1928, the Nazi Party, aided by Vatican funds given to Hitler by Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli. Right? Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, who later became Pope Pius XII, gained his first 12 seats in the Reichstag. On January 1st, 1930, Hitler's stormtroopers killed 8 Jews, the first victim of the Nazi era. Jews were molested in public places, and synagogue services were constantly interrupted. Okay, I'll get back to this stuff. I'm going to move this a little bit closer here. Let me kind of slide that over. Here we go. On January 30th, 1933, a political compromise made Hitler, then 43, Germany's chancellor. He swiftly established a Nazi dictatorship with no dissent allowed. Mein Kampf had promised to end an end to the Jews, who were now beaten in the streets, their stores looted, then boycotted. There we go. For centuries, Jews had been fleeing Europe. In the growing terrorism, stormtroopers would enter a village, smash and loot Jewish shops, trample the Torah in the synagogue, and assault and kill Jews in the streets. Frightened and bewildered Jews fled to neighboring towns, only to be expelled again and eventually taken to extermination camps. For centuries, Jews had been fleeing Europe to return to their ancient land. There in the 1920s and 30s, funded by the Nazis and aided by the British peacekeepers, anti-Jewish riots were led by Haji Amin al-Husseini, British appointed Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and 33-degree Freemason al-Husseini. And friend and admirer of Adolf Hitler and Himmler, and Yasser Arafat's great uncle and mentor and model, the Mufti, to whom Hitler on November 21st, 1941 promised a solution for the Jewish problem, similar to what he was pursuing in Germany, was personally responsible for the concentration camp slaughter of hundreds of thousands of Jews. During World War II, Haji Amin fled to Berlin, from which place he broadcast, "Arabs, arise as one man and slaughter the Jews wherever you find them. This pleases Allah." Jews fought on the side of allies and Arabs joined Hitler. As a reward, he promised to exterminate the Jews in their countries, as he was doing in Europe. In February 1945, when Allied victory was certain, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Lebanon declared war on Germany, an act required before March 1st, 1945, by any country that desired to join the newly organized United Nations. On November 29th, 1947, after 6 million Jews had perished, a briefly conscience-stricken UN in Resolution 181 gave surviving Jews 13% of the ancient land of Israel, misnamed Palestine, all which the League of Nations and the Mandate for Palestine, in July 24th, 1922, recognized its historical connection to the Jewish people, had allotted for their national homeland and was to have been administered by Britain under the Balfour Declaration. Look it up. It's very easy to find. Unhappy with being given the remaining 87% of what the League of Nations admitted belonged to the Jews and demanding it all, employing outside forces and arms from Arab states as distant as Iraq, Arabs rioted, plundered, and murdered Jews, encouraged by the British, who were hoping for an excuse to abandon their mandate to establish the Jewish homeland. Right? There you go. By the way, that's the scourge of Islam. Something worse than Nazism was rising in Arab religion called Islam, which centuries before had forcefully conquered most of the known world. Listen to this. This time, its monopoly of oil was its major weapon. When Israel declared independence in May 1948, it was instantly attacked by the regular armies of 6 Muslim nations, whose leaders publicly vowed to annihilate every Jew. Muslim leaders, both political and religious, more openly than Hitler, repeatedly called for the extermination of Jews. Islam requires this extermination before its last day resurrection can occur. On November 23rd, 1937, Saudi Arabia's King Ibn Saud said, "For a Muslim to kill a Jew ensures him an immediate entry into heaven." PLO leader Farouk Kadumi vowed this Zionist ghetto of Israel must be destroyed. And an Arabic translation of Mein Kampf remains a bestseller today in Palestinian Authority territories. Why? Because they're Nazis. If you understand that, you won't be confused. If you understand who the Nazis really are, you'll be fine then. Okay? But see, you have to understand who that the Arabs are Nazis. Islam, same thing. So are high-level Roman Catholics. Okay? High-level Roman Catholics are Nazis too. They started the Nazi movement. When it became a nation once again in 1948, about 800,000 Jews, doubled the number of original Palestinian refugees, by the way, fled to Israel from the horror, including the murder of thousands, that they had long endured in Muslim countries. Oddly, under all the emphasis that is given to the Palestinian refugees and their plight, one never hears a word about an even larger number of Jewish refugees who fled from there. But let's move on to the Pope here. We're going to talk more about him. Okay? facing the awful truth. It is not only the past, however, that many find difficult to face, but the present as well. That fact is clear in the numerous statements by Catholic Church leaders. See, you have to understand something about Rome, okay? At the same time, the Pope is seeming to condemn past anti-Semitism. Powerful elements within his church are denouncing such a change in attitude towards the Jews. Consider the following declaration, which excludes its own anti-Semitic odor. You ready? The Roman Catholic Church today is groaning under the weight of her enemies, who work day and night to destroy her. This enemy had caused the persecution, wars, upheavals, revolutions, intellectual aberrations, and the general decadence of human society. This pest in the Catholic Church and the scourge of all humanity is the Zionist, who is awaiting the future King of Israel. He is the eternal enemy of all Christianity. These are Christ killers even in modern times. We must voice our complete disagreement with Vatican II, they said. Declaration of the Jews. We are obligated to reject it as injurious to the following popes who have issued encyclical statements and warnings against the Jews. Well, is that right? Yes, indeed, it's right. So who are the popes that were against the Jews? Well, I'm glad you asked. All of them, pretty much. But I'll give you some. Honorius III, Gregory IX, Innocent IV, Clement IV, Gregory X, Nicholas III, Nicholas IV, John the 22nd, Urban V, Martin V, Eugene IV, Calixtus III, Paul III, Julius III, Paul IV, Pius V, Gregory the 13th, Sixtus V, Clement VIII, Paul V, Urbain VIII, Alexander VII, Alexander VIII, Innocent XII, Clement XI, Innocent XIII, Benedict XIII, Benedict XIV, Clement XII, Clement XIII, Pius VIII, Gregory XVI, Pius IX, Leo XIII, Pius X, Pius XI. Please don't ever forget about Pius XII, Pope Pacelli. Those powerful few Jews have succeeded to subvert our divine institution to serve their own ends. Why don't they cease to blaspheme the name of Jesus? They do not mention how they instigated the Roman persecutions and the murder of millions upon millions upon millions of Christians in the communist countries. They do not mention their hateful desecrations of the holy places in Palestine. The Jewish plot against our Holy Mother Church is reaching its culmination by their penetration and influence among the high Catholic clergy in the Vatican. End quote. What are they saying? The same thing you hear Catholic influencers say today. It's all the Jews' fault. We have to kill them all. That's what they're saying. Why? Because the original Nazis are Rome. Do you understand that? The original Nazis are Rome. That's the papacy. Okay? It is not only the past, however, but the present. Observing the 50th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, where between 1.1 and 1.5 million prisoners perished, 90% of them Jews, Pope John Paul II declared this: never again anti-Semitism, never again the arrogance of nationalism, never again genocide. The Holocaust was one of the darkest and most tragic hours of our history, a darkening of reason, of conscience, of the heart, especially for the Jewish people for whom the Nazi regime had planned a systematic extermination. Now those are fine words, end quote, by the way. Those are fine words, but they are hollow, without the necessary acknowledgement of his church's anti-Semitism, its slaughter of Jews through the centuries, and the supporting role it played in the Holocaust. There is also a denial in those words of the present reality. I'm going to make no bones about it. I want you to understand this very plainly. So now that I'm in the wide shot here, and I want you to understand this very plainly. No truce with Rome. I will not stand in line in anything with Rome. I will not stand in line with those priests. I will not stand in line with her people, with her bishops, with their cardinals. No truce with Rome. They are Antichrist. They are 1,000,000 times worse than Jews. And 1,000,000 times more seductive. No truce with Rome. Okay. Moving along here. The Vatican leaders are convinced that their church will eventually provide the authoritative answer to the world's dilemma regarding Jerusalem. That is why Rome has involved itself in its recent accord with Israel. The Roman pontiff hopes one day to preside over an ecumenical partnership between Judaism, Islam, and Roman Catholicism, which, by the way, is the Abraham Accords that happened 20 years later, 30 years later. It is true, goaded by their religious leaders, the Jews persecuted early Christians, just as the pagan Roman emperors did. Remember, for at least the first 100 years, it was not the Christians who persecuted the Jews, but the Jews who persecuted the Christians. It would be the 4th century before those who called themselves Christians, i.e. Roman Catholics, would begin to persecute and kill Jews. That mistreatment began only after Roman Catholicism became the only Christianity that was officially allowed. So you have to understand that what happened was they were the only Christianity, the only version of Christianity allowed. It was only at this point when the Roman Catholic Church began to dominate the empire and the papal system was in place. That the persecution of Jews began by those who claimed to be and whom the Jews thought were Christians. And we can hardly blame the Jews that as a result of centuries of such persecution of great fear and mistrust of Christians. Why would anybody trust Rome? Right? The Spanish Inquisition was an ecclesiastical court established in Rome, Catholic Spain in 1478 and directed originally against converts to Judaism and Islam, but later also against Protestants. It operated with great severity until it was suppressed in the early 19th century. The Holy Office is the ecclesiastical court of the Roman Catholic Church. It was established in the final court of appeals in the trials of heresy. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, a native of Bavaria. Oh, really? Yeah, the Jesuits always raise up their dictators in Bavaria. Adolf Hitler, Adam Weishaupt, the head of the Bavarian Illuminati, which is a Roman Catholic organization, not a Jewish one. There were no Jews in the Illuminati. They were Roman Catholics. Cardinal Ratzinger took the name of Benedict XVI in 2013. He retired and he was succeeded by Francis, which is now succeeded by Leo, the Lion. Hitler was a Roman Catholic and was never excommunicated by that church. Do you understand that? The Holocaust is seen as one of the more evidences against Christianity. But the Catholic Croatian Ustashi, headed by Ante Pavlovich, were responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of Jews in the 1940s, but also for the sadistic murders of hundreds of thousands of Serbian Orthodox adherents, who also claim, like the Catholics, to be Christian. So you have to understand something, what Rome does. Rome not only wanted to kill the Jews, okay? They definitely want to do that. But the other thing that Rome wanted to do, not just to kill the Jews, but to kill Protestants and professing Christians, to slaughter the sons and daughters. Who are the Ustashi? They were the German Nazi, or they were the Croatian Nazis. After German troops had occupied part of the territory in Yugoslavia in the middle of World War II, a fanatical Catholic soldiery under the leader of Ante Pavlovich took over in neighboring Croatia. These Christian rebels called themselves the Ustashi. In just a few weeks, they formed a terror regime which rivaled the German Nazi version. All religions except Roman Catholics were persecuted. Most of their followers were gathered in concentration camps. You can see pictures of that. See, there are what we want to look for. There's a few quotes here. Before he became Pope Pius XII, Cardinal Eugenio Pacelli, at that time papal nuncio to Germany, had given the Vatican money to Hitler to help fund the Nazi Party. The 1933 Vatican Concordat that Pacelli negotiated with Hitler gave the Nazis a certain legitimacy, and in Hitler's words, was a great help in the struggle against international Jews. Upon becoming Pope, Pacelli sent a condescending message to the Fuhrer, assuring him of the Vatican's goodwill. In part, he said this: "To the illustrious Adolf Hitler, Fuhrer and Chancellor of German Reich, we recall with great pleasure the many years we spent in Germany as apostolic nuncio, when we did all in our power to establish harmonious relations between church and state. Now, how much more ardently do we pray to reach that goal?" End quote. Wait a minute. So Pope Pius XII funds Hitler. And then when he's Pacelli, the papal nuncio, then he gets into office and he writes him a love letter. And you're all trying to tell me out there the Holocaust ain't real. You're trying to tell me out there that Rome wasn't part of the Holocaust. By the way, you can quote me. Steven Anderson is the biggest fool liar ever on this earth. Absolute fraud and a sham is what he is. Please tell him. Shouldn't the Vicar of Christ have more discernment than that? This was 1939, and Hitler's abuse of intentions for the Jews had been fully exposed to the world. Well, remember, with their papal magazines, their Jesuit magazines, they had already greased the skids in Germany for the Holocaust. They had already blamed the Jews and set it in the mind of people to blame the Jews by releasing the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, which is a Roman Catholic forgery, by the way. The Pope very well knew from the cardinals, bishops, and priests in Germany exactly what Hitler was doing to the Jews, and that he intended to exterminate them, and that Pius XII would, in spite of such knowledge, direct such flattery to Hitler is therefore all the more damning. Well, you have to understand something. Hitler was working for the Pope. He's working for the Pope. Do you understand that? People call it the Hitler's Pope. It's the other way around. It's the Pope's Hitler. The Pope's Hitler. The Chancellor of the Third Reich was working for the Pope. The Nazi Party was modeled after the SS. Excuse me. The Nazi Party, the SS, was modeled after the Jesuit order. Okay? If you get that, you'll get a lot. Okay? You'll understand a lot more. All right. As we've seen, It is Roman Catholic doctrine that neither the land of Israel nor the Jewish people are any longer of any special significance to the God of Israel, because the church has taken Israel's place. The Jews have been blamed for crucifying Christ when in fact they had no such authority. It was the Romans who did so. What the Jews did was to reject him as their king and demand that he be crucified, and thus he became the savior of the world, dying for the sins of all. The vast majority of mankind still reject him. Having blamed the Jews for the crucifixion, the church's treatment of them was unconscionable. The Council of Vienna in AD 1311 forbade all intercourse between Roman Catholics and Jews. The Council of Zamora in 1313 ruled that the Jews must be kept in strict subjection and servitude. The Council of Basel in 1431 instructed secular authorities to confine the Jews in separate quarters, to compel them to wear a distinguishing badge, as would Hitler do later, and to assure their attendance at sermons designed to convert them. Pope Eugenius IV prohibited Jews from holding public office or inheriting property from Catholics, and ordered confiscation of the property of any Italian Jew found reading the Talmudic literature. The mistreatment and persecution and murder of the Jews by the Roman Catholic Church throughout its history goes far beyond anything we can recite in this volume. There were, of course, some Catholics who did not fall under the condemnation, but in doing so, they endangered their own standing with the Church. Pope Benedict XIV had decreed that a Jewish child, though baptized against his own and its parents' will, was nevertheless a Roman Catholic. As only one of many examples, in 1851, a Catholic maid, without the Jewish parents' knowledge or consent, secretly baptized their baby son shortly after his birth. When the boy was 7 years old, Pius IX ruled that he was a Roman Catholic and ordered the papal police to take the child from his parents and put him in a Catholic boarding school, never to be returned to his family. The popes operated a house of catechumens in Rome, which managed to indoctrinate and baptize a number of Jews each year. Church officials complained that only the least intelligent and poorest Jews dressed in rags came voluntarily to be baptized, and only in order to escape the poverty and confinement of the ghetto. They're lying, of course. They kidnapped those kids, just like they kidnapped thousands of kids at the border of the United States. In Mexico, the Catholic Charities at the border. Do you understand? So, the vast majority of popes, however, persecuted the Jews, and that was the official stance of the Roman Catholic Church. Pope Urban II, who organized the First Crusade, promised instant entrance to heaven for those who died in the cause. On the way to the Holy Land, the Crusaders slaughtered Jews, more than 1,000 in 1096 in the city of Worms alone. And when they took Jerusalem, they herded the Jews into the synagogue and set it ablaze. Urban II had told them to take the land, not to restore it to the Jews, to whom it belonged, as the Bible clearly declared, but to the church as the new people of God. See how that works? By the way, you also see how it works, how there's only like 25 people on here because I mentioned Hitler and the Pope and the Jews, and you tell the truth about things, and like last broadcast was like 40 some people on there, 45 people on there. Yeah, they don't want this getting out. This ain't popular stuff here. Not popular talking points to get out. Don't want this talked about. You think Steven Anderson's going to tell you this stuff? No, you know why he's not going to? Because he works for Rome. That's why. He's a little plant. So they don't want this to get out. They don't want the child trafficking by Rome to be put out there. They don't want any of it to be talked about. The Catholic Charities at the border. Somebody said Trump defunded Catholic Charities at the border. Good for him. Good for him. Maybe God will bless him for it. Pope John Paul II made a show of apologizing for Roman Catholic past persecution of Jews without any mention of evangelical Christians, of whom far more perished at the hands of the church than the Jews. That's for sure. He always worded his statements very carefully, however, apologizing for the misdeeds of the sons and daughters of the church, but never admitting that it was the Roman Catholic Church and the papacy under the specific leadership of the popes that perpetrated the evil. In fact, history shows far more than 6 centuries without a break, the papacy was a sworn enemy of elementary justice. Of 80 popes in a line from 13th century on, not one of them disapproved of the theology and apparatus of the Inquisition. You better believe it. Not one of them did. Let's talk more about Pope Pius. What a name. Check devils. In a matter of indisputable record that Pope Pius XII never spoke out publicly to rebuke Hitler for attempting to exterminate the Jews. Pope Pius XII knew of the intentions to arrest the Jews in advance, but he gave no clear warning to the Jews. Settimia Spiciano was the sole Roman Jewish woman to return from deportation after having lain among a pile of dead bodies for 2 days. Being the only Roman Jewish woman to have survived the deportation, she returned to Rome aged 24 in 1945. Speaking in a BBC interview in 1995, she said, "I came back from Auschwitz on my own. I lost my mother, 2 sisters, a niece, and 1 brother. Pius XII could have warned us about what was going to happen. We might have escaped from Rome and joined the partisans. He played right into the Germans' hands. It all happened right under his nose. But he was an anti-Semitic pope, a pro-German pope. He didn't take a single risk. And why they say the pope is like Jesus Christ, it is not true. He did not save a single child. Nothing." From John Cornwall's book, Hitler's Pope, The Secret History of Pius XII. You better believe that devil didn't save any Jews. You better believe he turned on those Jews, and he turned them all over. He knew full well what was happening, had the power to stop it, but he was in charge of it. That's why he didn't stop it. And that's what you have to understand. Once you understand that, then you won't repeat it and be a dumb Gen Zer or be a dumb white dude in Canada that thinks it's smart to go ahead and turn against the Jews and blame them for everything and lift up Hitler and lift up and Pavlovich and lift up these devils that are going to destroy and kill people. Right? Just like the Muslims. You ain't never seen Jews raise up armies in America to try to take it over. Dingbat. It's Muslims that do that. And it's Roman Catholics that do that. And then there's some high-level Jews that instigate trouble. Yes. But they are not in charge. The young woman, Settimia Spizicino, had served as a human guinea pig in Dr. Mengel's experiments. When Bergen-Belsen, the camp to which she had been transferred, was liberated, she was found among a heap of corpses where she had been sleeping for 2 days. Do you understand? Then you got all these people, well, that's not real. Huh, it was pretty real to her. It's a matter of indisputable record. It is not difficult to see the entire world one day condemning Israel and attacking her to effect Hitler's final solution to the Jewish problem. The secular world can justify its attitude because Christians, quote, say that those Jews in Israel are there illegally, and they are not God's chosen people. After all, for the honor belongs to the church. Which is Obliterism, which was created by Rome. It is a matter of indisputable record that Pope Pius XII never spoke out publicly to rebuke Hitler for attempting to exterminate the Jews. Had he done so forcefully, had he forbidden Roman Catholics, who were a large percentage of the German military Gestapo, to participate in the mistreatment of extermination of Jews under pain of excommunication, should murderers remain in good standing in the church, he might have saved millions from Hitler's ovens. His defenders claim that Pius XII worked against the Holocaust behind the scenes. The Nazi archives, however, have yielded no evidence whatsoever to support this assertion, and access to Vatican archives is denied to truth seekers. And why is it denied? Because, friend, I'll go a step further than Dave Hunt goes. It's because the Pope Pacelli, or Pope Pius XII, was in charge of the Inquisition. Do you understand? Okay, listen. Do you understand that the Inquisition never stopped? Do you understand that Hitler in Germany and the Third Reich was an extension of the office of the Inquisition? Do you understand that? Do you understand the killing of Orthodox and the killing of Protestants and the killing of Baptists and World War I and World War II was all a part of the Pope's Inquisition? It was all the Crusades. It was all part of the war. It was all part of the same thing. It was the Inquisition. If you understand that, then you understand who Antichrist is. You understand why they have to blame the Jews. Do you get it? The Pope has an open policy and a closed policy. The Pope knew how to express himself forcefully when he wanted to, and he did so in opposition to the reestablishment of Israel in its promised land. He both worked behind the scenes and openly to prevent Israel's restoration, to which he and his church were adamantly opposed. On June 22nd, 1943, with the smoke of burning Jews hanging like a pall over Europe, the Pope wrote to President Roosevelt. Now, here's what he said to Roosevelt. Now, remember, there's an open policy and a closed policy. What is that? Let the Jews trickle back into the land, but not until the Pope can come there and build a third temple when it's time, and put his labor Zionist leadership, Masonic leadership in charge, working with the Grand Mufti, working with Chamberlain to keep all the Jews out of Israel, and denying the Balfour Declaration, working with them as their brother Freemasons, who are the ancient Knights Templar, who are under the Pope of Rome, still subservient to him, who are the Illuminati, right? Who aren't Jews. Do you understand that? The Illuminati was started by Adam Weishaupt. Adam Weishaupt was a professor at Ingolstadt. I like saying it like that. Right? Sounds like a bad episode of Hogan's Heroes. Anyway, he was the head professor of indoctrination. He started the Bavarian Illuminati after 1776, because they come to America. Okay? Now, let me help you with something. After 1776, they come to America. Okay? Like 1779, something like that. Okay? Why is that important? Because people are gonna talk about George Washington being a Mason. They're going to talk about, okay, they're going to talk about that, right? They're going to talk about, but here's the thing. When Washington and some of those other men were part of the Freemasonry in America, it hadn't been Illuminized yet. The illumination of the Freemasons did not come until after Adam Weishaupt brought them to America and illuminized them later, which would be about 1779, 1780. So yes, there are Freemasons, and no, I don't agree with Freemasonry at all, one bit. I preach against it all the time, but it was illuminized later. It started out being it meant that you weren't for the crown and you were a free man. It was like the Sons of Liberty. I mean, that's how it was in America anyway at the time. Then it became more illuminized later. Okay? All right. It is true that at one time Palestine was inhabited by the Hebrew race. He writes this to President Roosevelt. It is true that at one time Palestine was inhabited by the Hebrew race, but there is no axiom in history to substantiate the necessity of a people returning to a country they left 19 centuries before. Hey, are you listening? Do you understand what he's admitting in this comment, though? He's admitting that the same people that left 19 centuries ago are the same people that want to return. Do you understand that? So what's he blowing out of the water? With his own messed up statement, like all of the enemies of Protestants and Baptists and even the Jews commit, they're telling the truth somewhat. What's that? That the same people that left 1900 years ago are the same people that want to come back. Oh, they are. Okay. So they're not Ashkenazis or Khazari, fake Jews or whatever you want to say, whatever. And we're going to cover that, by the way, soon. Anyway. If a Hebrew home is desired, it would not be too difficult to find a more fitting territory than Palestine. With an increase in Jewish population there, grave new international problems would arise. Well, what did the Bible say? Jeremiah 30, verse 3. For lo, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people Israel and Judah, saith the Lord, and I will cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. Oh. Well, now. Of course, there is no axiom in history that would require the Jews to return to their land. This is a unique event, but there are hundreds of promises from God to that effect. How could the Pope, if he were really the representative of Christ on earth, the head of the true church, have overlooked the hundreds of promises in God's word that he would restore the Jews to their ancient land? That's because it's willful. Right? Willful. Pope Pius was an anti-Semitic pope. All of them are, by the way. Throughout an entire 3,000 plus year history, the land of Israel had never been divided. It had been conquered by various nations, but even when the Turks held it as part of their Ottoman Empire for 400 years, they did not divide it. A conqueror keeps the land he has conquered intact for himself. This division of Israel has happened only in our day. Britain, which had been placed in charge of Palestine in the wake of World War I by the conquering Allied forces, had been given the mandate by the League of Nations to see that the land should become a refuge for Jews who had been scattered everywhere. Instead of keeping it for Jews, Britain gave about 75% of it to the Arab Muslims. Do you understand that? It was done on purpose. God said that he was going to judge those that part the land, though, didn't he? We know where that came from. Emperor Hadrian. We understand. The name Palestine, that is. The following material on Pope Pius XII's anti-Semitism and his pro-German stand is taken in part from John Cornwell's Hitler's Pope, The Secret History of Pius XII. The abdication of German political Catholicism in 1933, negotiated and imposed from the Vatican by Pacelli with the agreement of Pope Pius XI, ensured that Nazism could rise unopposed by the most powerful Catholic community in the world. Pacelli's guarantee of non-intervention left the regime free to resolve the Jewish question. The perception of papal endorsements of Nazism in Germany and abroad helped seal the fate of Europe. Cornwell's book finds a new center of gravity in Pacelli's fateful negotiations with Hitler. These negotiations, in turn, cannot be seen in an isolation from the development of the ideology of papal power through the century, not from his wartime conduct and his attitude toward the Jews. Had Catholics protested specifically Kristallnacht and the rise of anti-Semitism, the fate of the Jews in Nazi Germany, and indeed throughout Europe, might have been different. If the churches had opposed the killing and the persecution of the Jews as they opposed the killing of the congenital insane and the sick, there would have been no final solution. Right, but you have to understand the popes are the one that put the final solution forward. How about Avro Manhattan? Let's quote from him. Okay? Roman Catholic Croatia and Orthodox Serbia, two ancient peoples, one Roman Catholic, the other Eastern Orthodox, and thus implacably enemies since the Jesuits' 30-year war, were forcefully united, creating Yugoslavia, named after the order's Pan-Slav movement. Remember, all Pan movements, Pan-America, Pan-German, are imperial and must lead to war. This enabled the Jesuits' Roman Catholic Franciscan-led Croatian Ustashi, whose Roman Catholic commander Ante Pavlovich was put in power by Roman Catholic Adolf Hitler, to barbarically murder between 700,000 and 1 million anti-papal Orthodox Serbs during World War II. The author regards Vatican's Holocaust by Avro Manhattan and Unholy Trinity by Mark Ahrens and John Loftus to be the definitive work on Pius XII's genocide. Frenchman Edmond Paris declares this. Edmond Paris, in his Jesuit book, he says, in June 1941, within a few days more than 100,000 men, women, and children were either killed or tortured and massacred in their homes, on the roads, in the fields, the prisons, and the schools, and even in the Orthodox churches. We discovered babies who had been impaled on the pointed slats of an enclosure, their small limbs contorted by pain like pinned insects. The most ferocious of cannibal rites have never equaled this. The Ustashis gouged out their victims' eyes, which they wore as garlands or carried in bags to be given away as mementos. This is Hitler's Pope. Roman Catholic Slavics and Protestant Bohemian Czechs were also united, creating Czechoslovakia. The latter enabled Adolf Hitler's Monsignor Josef Tiso to murder thousands of Protestant Czechs and Jews, deporting them to Auschwitz. For it was the priest Tiso, the first to deport heretics and liberals to Auschwitz, who said this: Catholicism and Nazism have much in common, and they work hand in hand to reform the world. End quote. Wow. Yeah. Israeli monument to Knight of Malta CIA James Jesus Angleton. The Popes Hitler and Stalinist Jewish Holocaust, aided by Weizmann and Ben-Gurion, was vital to the birth of Rome's labor Zionist Israel. The Knights of Malta, involved in creating and securing the Black Pope's Kingdom of Jerusalem, included Louis M. Bloomfield and James Jesus Angleton, he rescuing Italy's Black Prince, Valerio Borghese. CIA Angleton enabled the Mossad to secure nuclear weapons for Israel. He also advocated a war with Islam to destroy the Dome of the Rock and finally build the Third Hebrew Temple. By mid-1963, Islam's Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, who had been complicit in the Pope's SS-led Eurasian Jewish Holocaust, as did Cardinal Spellman. In fact, he considered JFK a threat to the very survival of the Jewish state. What's more, Israel's chief contact at the CIA in Washington, Knight of Malta, James Jesus Angleton, who was the head of the CIA, who created Mossad. Roman Catholics started the CIA. Roman Catholics, by the CIA, started Mossad. They are a Roman Catholic invention. Mossad doesn't run the CIA. It's the other way around. All the special forces are all of the secret societies and all of the spy agencies work together. They are not enemies. They all work together. That's what you have to understand. If you don't get it, then you get awful confused. Because you're trying to figure out whose side these people are on. Okay? And when you understand the Vatican runs all of them as that Antichrist kingdom. I'm looking for the quote. Hang on. Hitler with his, there's a picture here of Hitler and his Nazi elite overseen by Papal Nuncio Orsenigo in 1930. Above, we have one of the most telling pictures ever taken of the real movers of the Black Pope's Roman Catholic Third Reich, the Nazi Party having originated from Roman Catholics' Bavaria Masonic Tool Society. The Jesuit order, via its Civilita Cattolica, had agitated all of Europe with the Jewish question for nearly 50 years. See, they work in decades and centuries. Do you understand that? They do not work in days and years. They work in decades. They lay the groundwork very patiently and wait for it to come to fruition. Upon the destruction of Protestant Second Reich at the end of World War I, due to the treason of General Erich Ludendorff and the readmittance of the Society of Jesus into Germany in 1917, after its formal expulsion in 1872, it was time to implement the final solution to the Jewish question. Second from the left would stand Vice Chancellor Franz von Papen, white handkerchief in coat pocket and personal friend of Bishop Luigi Hudol, Minister of Defense of General Werner von Blumberg, Jesuit temporal coadjutor Chancellor Adolf Hitler, Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels, having been educated by Jesuits at the Albertus Magnus Association in Roman Catholic Cologne. And second from bottom right stands the Papal Nuncio Caesar Orsenigo in his full papal vestments. With the help of the Pope's Masonic Jewish labor Zionist Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion and Rudolf Kastner, in subordination to the order's SS General Heinrich Himmler and SS Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Eichmann and Bert Becker, the Hawking in Germany. Then you have Zagreb's Archbishop Stepanik meeting with the Ustashi General. They're all traitors of their own people. They're all murdering their own sons and daughters, and they're all murdering Jews and working together. That's what they do. Listen to this. Upon Hitler's death, faked by the SS and funeral, the fur began being honored by a solemn high requiem mass approved by Pope Pius XII, according to Eric Zeus's Why the Holocaust Happened, Its Religious Cause and Scholarly Cover-Up. For a job well done, he subsequently escaped to Franco's Spain, then on to South America. Meanwhile, Franco's Jesuit-controlled press declared this. Listen, and I quote, Adolf Hitler, son of the Catholic Church, has died defending Christianity. It is understandable that our pen cannot find words with which to deplore his death, when it is able to find so many to extol his life. Above his moral remains rises his victorious moral figure, with the crown of martyrdom that God gives to Hitler with laurels of victory. End quote. Rome never denounced Adolf Hitler. Ever. Right? Why? Well, he was a son of the Catholic Church. The Third Reich was not Lutheran. The Third Reich was Catholic. Were there Lutherans sprinkled in there? Yeah. But the Third Reich was Catholic, and it was ran by the Pope. Remember this quote. I'm going to read it to you again. Pius XII affirms Hitler, where his predecessors had tardily been preparing harsh words against Nazism and anti-Semitism and intending to recall of the papal nuncio from Berlin, Pacelli. Pope Pius XII proposed the following affirmation of the fur. To the illustrious Herr Adolf Hitler, Führer and Chancellor of the German Reich. Here at the beginning of our pontificate, we wish to assure you that we remain devoted to the spiritual welfare of the German people entrusted to your leadership. During many years we spent in Germany, we did all in our power to establish harmonious relations between church and state. Now that responsibility of our pastoral functions have increased our opportunities. How much more ardently do we pray to reach that goal? May the prosperity of the German people and their progress in every dominion come with God's help to fruition. End quote. Sound like Rome was against that? Not at all. Hitler had identified 11 million Jews in Eastern and Western Europe and was determined to exterminate everyone to the last man, woman, and child. Why should this be? An even larger question, however, looms before us, and that is the hatred of Israel. Although the outward expression of this, in general, seems to have largely subsided in much of the world, why was that animosity there? Here's another quote. Catholicism appeared on the face of it to have links with the very right-wing nationalism, corporatism, and fascism that sustained anti-Semitism, or complicitly in anti-Semitism on racial grounds. There were isolated but significant examples of Catholic bishops expressing anti-Semitic views, even as the persecution of Jews gathered place in Germany in the mid-1930s. There was evidence of anti-Judaism, even anti-Semitism, in the heart of the wartime Vatican. The Holy See did not object to the Vichy anti-Jewish legislation. President Roosevelt sent a personal representative to plead with Pacelli to say something clear about the extermination of the Jews. Said nothing. Cornwell, page 291. The Vatican, instead of thinking of nothing but the bombing of Rome, should consider their duties in respect of the unprecedented crime against humanity of Hitler's campaign of extermination of the Jews. Next quote. The Pope could not take sides. His Holiness is clinging at all costs to what he considers to be policy of neutrality, even in the face of the worst outrages against God and man, because he hopes to be able to play a part in restoring peace. He does not see this silence is highly damaging to the Holy See and entirely destructive of any prospects of his being listened to. Oh no, he knew exactly what he was doing. And he was doing it on purpose. You could see Croatian dictator Pavlović with the Franciscan priests. Franciscans are a wicked group, man. I'll send you this picture here. Just so you have it. Let's see. Give me a sec here. And here it is right here. This is the Croatian dictator Ante Pavlović and the Franciscan priests. They're killing all the Jews. Right? Pavlović is killing all the Jews and all the Orthodox. He's murdering them. And all the Franciscan priests are helping. They're all in fellowship together. Okay? The Pope could not condemn particular atrocities, either could he verify the Allies' reports on the number of Jews murdered. On December 24th, 1942, during his Christmas Eve message, Pacelli made his famous statement intended, as he later claimed, to be understood as a clear denunciation of the Nazi extermination of Jewish people. He said, "Humanity owes this vow to these hundreds of thousands who, without any fault of their own, sometimes only by reason of their nationality or race, are marked down for death or gradual extinction." End quote. Well, that's not saying anything. That's just making a general statement. Right. Because he wasn't going to say anything. This is not merely a paltry statement. The chasm between the enormity of the liquidation of the Jewish people and this form of evasive words is shocking. He might have been referring to many categories of victims of many belligerents in the conflict. Clearly, the exhibition of ambiguous language was intended to placate those who urged him to protest. Pacelli's failure to respond to the enormity of the Holocaust was more than a personal failure. Right, because he was running the Holocaust. Do you understand that? Pacelli's running the Holocaust. That's why he's not going to say a word. He's not going to say a word. Not on your life, is he gonna? According to Heinrich Himmler, the Order of the Death's Head, the SS was created to murder European and Russian Jews pursuant to, by the way, that's pursuant to the Council of Trent. That's not what he said, but that is. Sustained by the late Alberto Rivera, an ex-Jesuit under extreme oath, as validated by Gerard Bouffard, an ex-Roman Catholic bishop of Guatemala. Despite the Order's Nazi-fascist assertion that the Jewish Holocaust, though its remembrance has been used by the Order's Masonic Jewish labor Zionists as an industry to economically oppress surviving German people. In 1939, to the utter surprise of the world, Hitler and Stalin entered into an alliance, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which led to the attack, defeat, and partition of Roman Catholic Poland. Hitler's Wehrmacht invaded from the west, and Stalin's Red Army moved in from the east, neutralizing Polish resistance from what was to come. Although nearly entirely Roman Catholic and under Jesuit absolutionism, since Frederick II the Great and Catherine II the Great had partitioned the country, thereby making Pope Clement the 14th's bull of suppression and extinction in 1773 against the order of none effect. The Polish people were extremely patriotic and rightfully nationalistic. Poland also had the largest population of Jews in Europe, over 3 million. Therefore, the Society of Jesus was ever to unite in Europe, the Holy Roman Empire, under a future pope of its making. Poland's liberal people and priests, along with her racial and religious Jews, must be cruelly and systematically extirpated from the face of the whole earth, pursuant to the Jesuits' oath. See, that's how it works. That's why you had Hitler and Stalin working together, Lidowski working together, Lady of Fatima vision being used. All of those things. Franco's Spanish Civil War. See, all these are major players in a game. Lenin and Stalin, right? Backed by the Order's German Ludendorff, Masonic Lenin expelled the Knights of Malta in 1917 to make their revolution appear to be anti-czarist and anti-nobility, and he readmitted the Jesuits back into Russia after a 100-year expulsion in 1922. Georgian Gentile Freemason Joseph Stalin, Jesuit trained from his youth, was aided by the Order's British RIIA. An American CFR secretly led by the Papal Knights led the Order's Soviet Inquisition via the Jesuit Vlazovic, murdered all patriotic officers and Red Army benefiting Pope Pius XII's Nazi invaders. See, every step is calculated. It's not an accident, friend. It's not an accident. They're all working together. They were all working together. Heinrich Himmler, in this picture, he's reviewing his SS Muslims recruited with the aid of the order's pro-Nazi Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. They were friends. Haji Amin al-Husseini, he prepared to murder the heretic Serbian Orthodox people. Fighting as Masonic General Tito's partisans, the Serbs fought both the Ustashi and the Handskar, backed by the Pope. These fanatical killers would also murder 90% of the Jews of Croatia. Pope Pius XI, in praise to the Duce in his regime, described Mussolini as the man whom Providence allowed us to meet. The ex-Jesuit pro-Lenin sovereign pontiff Pope Pius XI further stated, Mussolini will conquer all in his path. Mussolini is a wonderful man. Do you hear me? A wonderful man. The future is his. Thus, fascism and Jesuitism go hand in hand. Pierre von Passen declared in 1939, he said this, for today, Rome considered the fascist regime the nearest to its dogmas and interests. We have not merely the Reverend Jesuit-led Father Coughlin's praising Mussolini's Italy as a Christian democracy, but Civilita Cattolica, house organ of the Jesuits. The same Bavarian priest, von Dallinger. Fascism is the regime that corresponds most closely to the concept of the Church of Rome. No kidding. The fascist dictator Benito Mussolini working for the Pope. Fascist Catholic dictators Mussolini and Hitler. None of these people were enemies. None of them. All busy serving the Pope. You have Himmler, you have Goebbels, you have all these men, dastardly and devilish men, all working for the Pope, all ran by the Pope. Until now, it has not been possible to relate the full history of Pacelli's career as diplomat and a Cardinal Secretary of the State. The new material made available in his narrative, however, reveals Pacelli's long-standing anti-Jewishness. This is what we know with certainty about Pacelli's attitudes, policies, and decisions relating to the Jews spanning a quarter of a century. Pacelli displayed a secret antipathy toward the Jews. Evident from the age of 43 in Munich, both religions and races, a circumstance contradicting later claims that he respected the Jews, that his wartime actions and omissions had been performed with the best of intentions. From 1917 through to the recovered lost encyclical of 1939, Humanae Generis Unitas, Pacelli and the office for which he was responsible betrayed an antagonistic policy toward the Jews, based on the conviction that there was a link between Judaism and the Bolshevik plot to destroy Christendom. Pacelli's concordant policy, as he well knew, thwarted potential Catholic protests in defense of Jews. Whether they were converts to Christianity or not, as a matter of outside interference, the potential in the Reich Concordat for sanctioning the destruction of the Jews was acknowledged by Hitler himself in his cabinet meeting on July 14, 1933. While publicly repudiating racist theories through the mid to late 1930s, Pacelli failed to sanction protests by the German Catholic Episcopate against anti-Semitism, nor did he attempt to intervene in the process by which Catholic clergy collaborated in racial certification to identify the Jews, providing the essential information. See, he was silent on purpose. The failure to utter a candid word about the final solution in progress proclaimed to the world that the Vicar of Christ was not moved to pity and anger. From this point of view, he was the ideal Hitler's unspeakable plan. He was Hitler's pawn. He was Hitler's Pope. See, now I disagree with that. It's the other way around. The papacy is in control of Hitler, just like the papacy was in control of Ante Pavlovich. Just like he was in control of the Eustachi. Just like he's in control of the American government. Just like he's in control of the English government. How is the Pope in control of the English government? Well, the Bishop of Canterbury, some fat white lesbian, right? Goes over there, head of the state church there, the Archbishop in charge of the State Church of England, okay? Goes over, bows the knee to the Pope. The King comes over to America. Marco Rubio, and the Vice President of the United States go to the funeral, go to see Benedict, then go to the funeral, then go to the coronation. And they're Roman Catholics. Right? But who are they going to blame for all this? Pete Hegseth. They're going to blame Pete. Why Pete? Because he's the token Protestant under a Protestant denomination, but has his Knights of the Equestrian Order tattoo on him. But they're going to blame the Protestant for all this. The Catholic's going to skate out of it, and they're going to blame the Protestant for it. The professing Protestant, which he's really not. Because they all work for the Pope. Pacelli's single breach of his self-imposed silence on the liquidation of the Jews was that ambiguous sentence during his Christmas 1942 broadcast, which failed to use the word Jew, non-Aryan, German, or Nazi. It's all on purpose. All part of the plan, friend. But there was a more immediate test of Pacelli's papacy that occurred before the liberation of Rome, when he was the sole Italian authority in the city. On October 16th, 1943, German troops entered the Roman ghetto area, rounded up all the Jews they could find, and imprisoned them in the Collegio Militaria on the Via della Longara in the very shadow of the Vatican. How did Pacelli acquit himself? There was no explicit condemnation of anti-Semitism, even in relation to Catholic Jews. Not only did Pacelli make no reference to the burgeoning anti-Semitism in Hungary, but he had no word of criticism. Look, Pacelli was the sole authority in Rome, and he never stopped, hindered Hitler's men from kidnapping those Jews and killing them and throwing them in ghettos. Never. From the ghettos and then killing them. Never stopped them. Never said a word about it. Pacelli's policy had been one of public silence and private indifference on the Jewish issue. Pacelli's office had repeatedly revealed the attitude the Jews must look after themselves. The encyclical Humanae Generis deals with the reflections on Judaism and anti-Semitism. He says, blinded. God had chosen them to make way for Christ's redemption, but they denied him and killed him. And now, blinded by their dream of worldly gain and material success, they had deserved the worldly and spiritual ruin they had brought down upon themselves. The draft encyclical goes on to defend the Catholic Church against charges of anti-Semitism, as Pacelli himself would do after the war. Which he did nothing to stop. Wherever Jews had been granted citizenship, the outcome had been the ruination of Christians or the massacre of the alien race. That's what he said. The encyclical was delivered in the autumn of 1938 to Ledachowski, who sat on it. Oh, the Black Pope? Yeah. Eventually, he passed it to the editor-in-chief of Civilta Cattolica, who also appears to have sat on it. Why was the encyclical not completed in good time and delivered to the pontiff? We do not know. For all its drawbacks as thoroughgoing condemnation of anti-Semitism, it appears likely that the Jesuits and perhaps Pacelli, whose influence would have been paramount during Pope Pius XI's illness, were reluctant to inflame the Nazis. In other words, he wrote this secret paper that he said, I'm against being mean to the Jews, but he never produced it. He never had it produced. Neither did the Black Pope. Why? Because they didn't want it out there. There were significant differences between 19th century racism inspired by perverted social Darwinism and traditional Christian anti-Judaism that had persisted. Racist anti-Semitism of that kind that was to give rise to the Nazi final solution was based on the idea that Jewish genetic stock was biologically inferior in nature. Hence the evil logic that their extermination would yield advantages on the path to national greatness. In the late Middle Ages, Spanish Jews were excluded from pure community of Christian blood, and questions were raised during the period of European lost my place, sorry. Discovery of the Americas about the status of indigenous natural slaves. Christian antipathy toward the Jews was born out of the belief dating from the early Christian church that the Jews had murdered Christ indeed, that they had murdered God. The early fathers of the church, the great Christian writers of the first 6 centuries of Christianity, showed striking evidence of anti-Judaism. The blood of Jesus, wrote Origen, falls not only on the Jews of that time, but on all generations of Jews up to the end of the world. They said, Chrysostom said the synagogue is a brothel, a hiding place for unclean beasts. Never has any Jews prayed to God. They are possessed by demons. Of course, Constantine ordained that Easter should not complete with the Passover. It's unbecoming, he declared. And he persecuted the Jews, put special taxes on them, banned their synagogues, outlawing intermarriage between Jews and Christians, persecution flourished in successive imperial reigns. Lateran councils, same thing. Condemned the Waldenses, condemned the Donatists, condemned the Albigenses. Then we have the notion of Jewish obstinacy was a crucial element in the case of Edgardo Mortara. When the parents of a kidnapped Edgardo pleaded in person with the Pope for the return of their son, Pio IX told them that they could have their son back at once if they converted to Catholicism, which of course they would do instantly if they opened their hearts to Christian revelation. But they would not and did not. The Mortaros, in the view of Pio IX, had brought all their suffering upon their own heads as a result of their obduracy. Jewish hard-heartedness was a parallel at points overlapped with the notion of Jewish blindness, exemplified in the Good Friday liturgy of the Roman Missal, when the celebrant prayed for the perfidious Jews and asked that our God and Lord would withdraw the veil from their hearts that they may also acknowledge our Lord Jesus Christ. This prayer, at which the celebrant and people disdained to kneel, continued until it was abolished by Pope John the 23rd. So in other words, they would kidnap the Jewish children. Okay? They would kidnap the Jewish children, take them, and convert them forcibly to Roman Catholicism. And if the parents would not convert to Roman Catholicism, they would, in essence, take their life or take their children, and they would not give them back. Okay? The very fact that Hitler and Pacelli, Hitler hails the Concordat. The very fact that the Vatican had signed such a treaty, the Concordat with Hitler, indicated Catholic morale moral approval of Hitler's policies. The majority of the law observators, readers were Jews and Masons. With Hitler's invasion of Yugoslavia and the Wehrmacht entering Zagreb, the Croat fascists were allowed to declare an independent Croatia. By April 12th, Hitler had used his plan for a partitioned Yugoslavia, granting Aryan status to an independent Croatia under Ante Pavlovich. Pavlovich had plotted the assassination of King Alexander in 1934. Remember, Pavlovich's group, the Ustashi, had opposed the formation of the South Slav Kingdom of Yugoslavia after the First World War and had planned disruption and sabotage from the safe haven in Italy. So, Pavlovich was working with Hitler and for Hitler and for the Pope. Okay? Pacelli and the Bolshevik Jews. Pacelli said this: Pacelli's concern eloquently exposes, amplifies, and draws attention to his total silence on the vast atrocity of the Shoah in progress. Pacelli's constant harping on Jewishness gives an impression of stereotypical anti-Semitic contempt. The Jews of Rome. No periodic kindness to this ancient community could eradicate the stains on Christian consciences down the centuries, including the legislation of the medieval Lateran councils that had confiscated the Talmud and enforced yellow badges centuries before the Nazis had imposed the yellow star. Alexander VI had given the Jews of Spain hospitality in the city, but Paul IV in 16th century had established the Roman ghetto. For more than 2 centuries thereafter, the Jews in Rome were ritually humiliated and degraded at the annual carnival. Listen to this. It was an annual carnival until they escaped the ignominy by footing the entire bill for each year's festivities. Also in the 16th century, Gregory XIII instituted and enforced Christian sermons insulting Judaism. The practice was abolished by Pio IX along with the ghetto, but he reestablished the ghetto after the collapse of the Roman Republic in 1849 when he made Jews underwrite the financial costs of his return to Rome. Through all these vicissitudes of 2 millennia, the Jews of Rome had never surrendered their faith or practice of their liturgies and scriptures. The number of Jews in central Rome at the time of the German occupation in 1943 was about 7,000. The former ghetto on the banks of the Tiber was a pleasant enough place by the late 1930s, its disease-ridden tenements demolished or renovated, but the district was mainly inhabited by poor members of the Jewish community. Since Pacelli had no intention of making a demonstrative censure on the Jews' behalf on October 16th, and therefore it resulted in their being condemned. It was a decision that had less to do with the fear of greater reprisals than fear of communism. In Berlin, a nameless official had underlined the significant phrases: Pope, not pushed into demonstrative censure of the deportation of the Jews of Rome. Done everything possible, even in this delicate matter. It may be said that this matter, so unpleasant as it regards German-Vatican relations, has been liquidated. Pacelli was not inclined to protest officially at any stage against the roundup or deportation of Rome's Jews. He said nothing. He did nothing. Because he was in charge of it. Do you understand? On March 26, L'Osservatore Romano carried an article sympathizing with the German soldiers who had been killed. The partisans complained that the statement sympathized with the Nazi enemy occupiers while condemning those fighting for Italy's freedom. In other words, the Pope mourned the loss of German soldiers and ignored the defense of the Italian freedom fighters. The Vatican's licensed thurifiers keep on reminding their readers that Pius XII protested against the aggressions in the encyclical letter Summae Pontificalis. In reality, this ludicrous document, like all other such documents which number less than 45 pages, contained only one phrase at the end. See, he didn't do anything. He just lied. He just lied. The Pope did nothing. He said nothing. Right? Why is that? Because he had no desire to. The Observatore Romano in Vatican's official voice informs us that on the 22nd of July, 1941, the Pope received 100 members of the Croatian security police, led by the chief of Zagreb police, Eugene Kavanidido. This group of Croatian SS, the pick of the executioners and torturers operating in concentration camps, were presented to the Holy Father by one who perpetrated crimes so monstrous that his own mother committed suicide in despair. Do you understand? So in other words, the Pope has a secret audience with the Croatian security police that were murdering Jews and Orthodox. And he knows full well it's happening. He's orchestrating it. Do you see how they work both sides? This is that mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Massacres and conversions took place until the liberation, and the goodwill of the Holy Father towards the killers never altered. One must read in the Croatian Catholic newspapers of that time the exchanges of compliments between Pius XII and Pavlovich, to whom Monsignor Sarek, Jesuit Archbishop Sarajevo, and a poet in his spare time dedicated verses impregnated with the rapturous adoration. The Croatian Catholic press vied with each other in flattering the bloody Pavlovic. Pius XII was so pleased that he was practicing Catholic, and the high esteem of the sovereign pontiff embraced even the accomplices of this great man. The goodwill of His Holiness Pius XII is easily explained by the apostolic zeal of these killers. Another practicing Catholic, Mile Budok, minister for the worship, exclaimed in August of 1941 at Kalabak, "The Staushi movement is based on religion. All our work rests on our loyalty to religion and the Catholic Church." Besides, on July 22nd at Gospic, the same minister for worship had perfectly defined his work. "We will kill some Serbians, deport others, and the rest will be compelled to embrace the Roman Catholic religion." Edmund Paris, page 146. On the 10th of February 1960, the infamous Archbishop of Zagreb, Aleo Stepanic, died at his native village of Karlovac, where he had been made to reside. The death gave the Vatican an opportunity to organize one of its spectacular manifestations for which it excels. On that occasion, a lot had been done, as many Catholics had no illusions as far as Stepanic's case was concerned. So the Holy See surpassed itself to give this apotheosis all the pomp possible. The Observatore Romano and all the Catholic press dedicated many columns to the rapturous praise of this martyr. Remember, he's made a saint by Rome later, by Pope John Paul. These Eustaushis were Nazis that were killing Christians and Jews. This is who they are. They ran the Holocaust. Both sides understand. They ran both sides. When you understand that, you will not be confused. Okay? Why Hitler and Stalin worked together. Why Mussolini worked together. Why Pavlovich worked together. Why the Vatican rat lines got all the top high-level Nazis out. And they blamed some fall guy Protestant that they were able to blame. While the top high-level Nazis escaped. Do you understand? Hitler escaped. And Hitler was not killed. Understand that. If you get that down, you will not be confused. Now, what is the summation of all these things? I'll give it to you. That none of these are heroes. The King of England is an apostate antichrist, just like Trump is. The summation of all this is coming. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you I told you these things, and now you know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work, only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. And for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believe not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. The world is preparing for Antichrist. The kingdoms of this world are preparing for Antichrist. This is who they are, and this is what they are preparing for. This is the direction that it is going. There are no heroes in this world, in this world system. If they get any direction or any ways up the ladder, it's because they're usually almost 99% bought and paid for already. Or if they're not, they will be soon. This is mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. This is that Revelation 17 and 18. This is that beast system in Revelation chapter 13. This is that system that is arising to unite the world. And you have the technocracy, right? You have the unifying of this over here. Why is Marco Rubio talking about Cuba when we're not even done with Iran yet? Because they're negotiating for Cuba. Cuba, Canada, Greenland, United States, Mexico, Venezuela, all going to be one. Part of the technocracy, part of a one world currency, part of a control of information, all coming down. Look up, for your redemption draweth nigh. Even so, come Lord Jesus. Because that's what's next for us, is the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's who we should be looking for. Looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. And by the way, you could not have it go Romans 9 through 11. Paul is explaining to the Gentiles as a group. He is explaining to them that that Israel is in blindness until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. That all this had to happen with Hitler, with the Jews returning to the land, to push the furtherance of the Jews going back to the land. All of this has to happen. Has to. It's a must. It must happen. Because all eyes will be on Israel. Every nation will be dragged down